All right, all right. Good evening, everyone. Good morning, everyone, depending on where you're joining us. Buenos dias, obrigado, depending on where you're joining us. Today, I always say we have a special guest. And obviously all our guests are special. Just yesterday, we had Ambassador Babe Romualdez naman to discuss one side of the story, discuss the perspective of the Marcos administration, to discuss the threat from China, to discuss about how things are going under the Marcos administration. I just felt it's perfect also to have the point of view of another very special person, a longtime mentor. That someone sometimes we disagree on a number of issues, but I think that's part of what academic life and intellectual is. Thank you so much again, Dr. Professor ex-Congressman Walden Bello. Thank you, Walden, for joining us.
Oh, thanks for inviting me, Richard. It's always a pleasure to be in contact and discuss with you. Can you hear me okay?
Of course, we can hear you perfectly. Obviously, Walden, we've been hoping to have you earlier here. A lot has happened since last time we talked. Our previous episode obviously was among the best sellers we had. Kasi kakaiba di ba? What we do here is not your usual journalistic interview and pa-cute and quotable quotes. We look at the big picture. Obviously, Walden, the reason why I had to go German and mention all your titles is, just to remind people how many hats you wear. Obviously, you're also an activist. Although we're both activists in certain ways, although probably I'm more the caviar version since my dad has roots in the Caspian region. But going back to this, Walden, I want to go big picture now. I want to go big picture. You're joining us obviously from Latin America, and you have been in Latin America for quite some time. I want to discuss a little bit of Latin America. I want to discuss a little bit about Thailand and what's happening all around the world. But first of all, obviously you're based in the Philippines. You spend most of your time in the Philippines. Your heart and soul is here in the Philippines. Now, first of all, what is your analysis of the state of play so far under the Marcos Jr. administration? Before we go to the foreign policy, which I think is mahabang usapan, let's just talk about the political landscape. What is your reading, Walden? Because as we speak, my understanding is there's already a push to impeach Sara Duterte. Not only the unity team is over, but it's going into like kind of a mini civil war, Game of Thrones mode. What is your take on this whole drama?
Well, it's unfortunately it fits right into the pattern of Philippine elite politics, where we're basically seeing a dynastic kind of conflict that unfortunately it's sort of a drama that substitutes for real effective reform politics. No, so the energies within the political system gets caught up in this dynastic conflict. And what should be the focus really on the problems confronting our economy, confronting agriculture, foreign policy, gets shunted aside. And we have the Game of Thrones spectacle that begins to gain people's attention. And my sense is I've seen this before, okay? And unfortunately, it keeps on coming back. And I sort of, once it becomes this sort of dynastic conflict in which there are really no national interests. I mean, what I mean is when there, in terms of real issues being addressed, then I sort of, go into sometimes a critical mode, and basically what I hope would happen is that, hey guys, let's quit this drama and refocus back on real national issues that affect the conditions of the majority of our people. So let's leave na yung mga spectacles to Netflix, leave it to HBO, Doon na lang manood yung mga tao. Huwag na nating gawin spectacle yung ating politics kasi sobra na.
I mean, we just had a long conversation about response to Kaloy's double gold, and everyone was like digging into his personal life, and he was not helping the situation. But Walden, let me not push back, but kind of give a different perspective on this. I mean, obviously there's a lot of drama, family feud, personalistic antics, populist antics there and all. And obviously if you look at Marcos and Duterte's, it's not like there's a dramatic ideological difference between the two. Nevertheless, there is an implication, right? The fallout between the Marcoses and Duterte's provides some space for real alternatives, for genuine alternative, including alternative discourse. It also means to a certain degree that Marcos Jr., by virtue of his opposition to Duterte's, is recalibrating the worst aspects. I'm not saying Marcos is a progressive, but at least is recalibrating the worst aspects of Duterte administration, whether this is the all-around red tagging, EJK's right and left. Yes, we still have human rights violations. Yes, there are reports of EJK. Yes, there are reports of harassment of the progressives, but it's orders of magnitude, right? And it matters. It matters. And I think if you talk to people in the media, they feel less threatened. People like yours truly feel less threatened. I mean, I was getting almost death threats every day during Duterte administration. It was crazy. The level of impunity that was back then. Now, none of this says that Marcos shouldn't come clean under his historical background. You and I are both Ilocano, so we're very aware of the whole, Marcos legacy and all the propaganda around it. But isn't that in itself important enough to at least open up the space and give some breathing room for the real progressive forces to gather their forces and come back stronger?
Well, it's a different kind of situation from before. But I would say that we have to be very careful in saying that it's better than before. Because for me, while definitely the level of threat has de-escalated, it also bothers me very much that issues of the stomach are really being shunted aside by this dynastic fight. The inflation rate continues to be very high, and basically we continue to be in a stagnant mode. And so I would say that rather than saying it's better than before, I would say that it's different. It's different, and there are a number of reasons for that, not just the economic, but there's also the foreign policy and defense question that you wanted to talk about, but later.
Yeah, I think that's my fear is once we go into the West Philippines, medyo mahabang usapan yan. But just to remind everyone, one of the reasons that I think no one can question your patriotism, Walden. We may have some differences on tactics, I would say, if I can put it that way. But I think all of us owe something to you because, and this is on the record and all, you were the man who pushed for the resolution renaming our exclusive economic zone into West Philippine Sea. So if there's one person or 10 persons, at least you're one of them who was behind the West Philippine Sea. So this is just for some people who are not aware of the massive contributions you have made to our national interests and foreign policy, Walden. I just had to I had to put that out. So kaya nga sabi ko, you may disagree with Walden, but you can never question his patriotism. He has been there fighting for West Philippine Sea since ever. But Dr. Bello, let's go back to this. What do you think is the threat here? Because it looks like you're saying complacency could be a form of evil in itself, that it can disarm people and probably not only distract people from more fundamental issues. Baka mangyari pa dito is baka there will be baka we haven't seen the final version of Marcos Jr. yet. At the end of the day, he's still a Ferdinand. He's still Marcos. He's a fellow Ilocano, so we know Ilocanos. Never underestimate Ilocanos, right? I mean, what is your read of that? The risk of complacency, over complacency by opposition and the rest of civil society.
Well, if you're asking me that, I don't think we can afford to be complacent at this point. The lack of direction in terms of where our economy and our politics should go should worry us. And the fact that, again, our foreign and defense policy have practically been outsourced to the United States should worry us. So my sense is, aside from the drama, there's just this very, very disturbing drift as to where our country is headed. And it doesn't seem like the government is in command. So what's happening is that there is a substitute of this, the drama, the dynastic drama becomes a cover-up for a lack of direction coming from inside. And basically, I'm not surprised with respect to the president because, I did serve with him in Congress. No?
Yeah,
During
I
my
heard from
first,
you the first that you said, I think you said something like his
Yeah.
speech was not too bad. He seems to have some basic sensibilities. Sorry, I'm putting you on the on the spotlight, but
No, I mean,
I remember from you before I met him myself.
sure. Well, I mean, that was from one speech, but then, from his performance or non-performance when he was in Congress, I basically saw somebody that had no sense of the national interest, but was very, very conscious of the dynastic interest. So ang sense ko lang is, pag linagay natin ang isang tao na mahina ang sense of national interest, then we in fact risk, the problem of not having a clear national, direction. So this is my worry at this point, that there is not a sense of the national direction coming from within the country, and that is being outsourced to um, to actors that have a clear sense of what they want to do. So this is my worry at this
So, Walden,
point.
essentially, you're saying that he's a U.S. puppet. Is that what you're saying? That he's not acting in the interest of the Philippines?
Yes, I mean, it's very clear to me that it's been completely outsourced at this point in time. In many ways, I think because his dad was brighter, in a Machiavellian sort of way, that his dad had a sense. We may disagree with where he was bringing the country, but he had a sense of direction. I think that with respect to Marcos Jr., that there's no sense of direction there, and that whatever Washington wants at this point is Washington gets. And I think we should not underestimate the buildup that is happening in the Philippines at this point. I mean, 9 military bases being given to the United States is no joke. And it's all non-transparent because the United States just doesn't reveal what's happening within those bases. But at the same time, I think we do know that there is one overriding objective of the United States at this point, and that is to make the Philippines a launching pad for the containment of China. Now, let me just say here that it is unfortunate that the Chinese have made certain moves which have really hurt our fishermen, have challenged our national interest. And as I've written in the past, this sort of different views between us and China could be something that could be easily negotiated. And this could be something that, if Beijing were open to it, could turn into a demilitarization of the South China Sea, or the West Philippine Sea, as we called it. And it is unfortunate, in my view, that because of China's worries about being encircled by the United States, that it is moving in such a way that is not acceptable, which is declaring that 90% of the South China Sea is China's. And I guess what I'm trying to say here is that no matter how valid the Chinese concerns are about the soft underbelly of South and Southeast China, which is where the location of their industries are, the center of the Chinese industrial infrastructure, how they feel that's so vulnerable to attack from the United States in that area. Nevertheless, that does not give them the excuse to do what they have done. And in fact, my point here has always been that this could have been negotiated, but you now have acted in such a way that you've given the United States the excuse to create this military buildup that is in fact aimed at your own country. So is there a way that we can just pull back and really negotiate a demilitarization of the area, and not this kind of unilateral grabbing of a of a disputed territory? So, so I would say that I say this because it's this geopolitical conflict that is now driving the dynamics, of our country. And I think we really need to get our country out of that grip at this point in time, before we lose any sort of control over our fate. And I think that we must not underestimate the dangers of war. When I visited Vietnam back in 2014, when I was still a member of Congress, the Vietnamese, told me that what they were worried about was that there could be an accidental ship collision between hostile ships playing chicken with one another, that is, heading for one another, then swerving at the last minute. And what if a miscalculation happens and the ships ram each other? And since there are no rules of the game, it could escalate, a ship collision could escalate into a higher form of warfare. And that's sort of the uncertainty. Walang rules of the game dun sa South China Sea at this point in time, Richard. And, when will, suppose one of these days, there's some sort of collision over there, and the president says that we're going to invoke the Mutual Defense Treaty, and the United States says yes. Wala na. I mean, you don't have any rules that would govern how do you contain a conflict so that it doesn't explode into full-scale war.
The
How do you make
guardrails, right? The guardrails. Yeah.
the guardrail? How do you make sure that something does not turn into another Ukraine? How do you make sure that something does not turn into another kind of Gaza? So this I think are great dangers, and we really must pay special attention to them at this point in time. And coming back to your question, then, my sense is talagang may drift in terms of policy that is occurring right now in the country. And that's my greatest worry. And that's why when you raise the question of complacency, we cannot be complacent at this point in time.
I was I was really trying to avoid the conversation going here Precise, because I think everyone's aware that my take is quite different. In a sense
Okay.
that, and I want to get no, and I want to also get your response to that. Because Walden, I understand that, you know, a lot of people came of age knowing the US as the hegemonic power in every sense of the word, in the Gramscian sense of the word, in the realist sense of the word. And I think all of us share criticism of the US policy in different parts of the world, whether it's in Latin America, whether it's the Afghanistan, Iraq, we can go on that. Where I think I differ is that I do not see China as a victim, and I don't see China as a secondary power. I do believe that in this part of the world, China is as hegemonic as the United States. And if anything, China has an advantage over the United States in terms of economic influence, in terms of geography, because US is spread. I mean, they're involved in Ukraine, they're involved in Middle East, they're in, like, China can concentrate its power here. And just to be clear about it, it's not the US threatening invasion of Taiwan, it's the Chinese threatening the invasion of Taiwan. And it's not the Americans threatening the Philippines in the West Philippine Sea. It's the Chinese who are threatening us, also with the Vietnamese, among other things. So my framing is slightly different, just to put it mildly. My understanding is that the whole containment discussion, you cannot contain China. Both of us know, Walden, China is just so powerful and so big and so locked into the core of global economy that there's no, I mean, they couldn't even contain Russia. Not even Iran. I mean, all the sanctions are not bringing down those two countries. Forget about China. China is just so big and important. So I think that's where my theoretical even difference would come in. But nevertheless, I do understand the concern, Walden, because no, I'm not going to vouch for Marcos making sure that he can hold the Americans back. But I want to hear me on this, Walden. No, I was in New Zealand the other month, among other things. No, I was also in Germany. I met Chancellor Scholz. You know, I go around a lot of these countries. They're liberal democracies like us, or at least better version, and they don't want to be also dependent on the US. It's always about how do we band together so that we're not dictated upon by either the Americans or Chinese, especially if, God forbid, another Trump wins. But that's the line I keep on hearing. But the idea also here is that we shouldn't be blind to what China is doing, and we should be working together. And also, my understanding is that it's not like the Marcos administration is not working with the New Zealands and Germanys and Japans and Indias, South Koreas of the world. I mean, South Korea is a country that is US ally, but they try to balance relations. Turkey is another US ally. So what I want to understand here, Walden, is what is the realistic way forward for us to deal with the other hegemonic power, counter-hegemonic bloc, which is really led by China. And my fear is that if we use the language of containment, we may indirectly, and as I said, you are a patriot, I never question, but we may indirectly contribute to the pro-China proxy people's rhetoric na parang sila pa yung biktima. Kasi parang feeling ko, Walden, kasi nag-gaslight tayo. And the reality is that we have very limited military capability on our own to deal with China. And you know this better than me, ASEAN is short of useless when it comes to dealing with China. A lot of them are too dependent on China. So I think we have slightly different understanding on the level of theory and fact. And probably that explains where our policy positioning is divergent. But I do agree with you, Alden, that we have to be careful not to be over-dependent on the Americans, and we have to build up our own capabilities. My worry is that baka between now and the moment where we, like Vietnam, can build our capabilities, that gap could be extremely exploited by China. But probably your understanding is that no, the US will exploit it. So I think this is where our difference comes in. I came of age, especially the 30 years of my life is when China became a global superpower, right? So probably that's where my sensibility is a bit different from yours, Walden. I'm not playing the age card. I'm just saying US is a superpower, but China is also a superpower. So I don't see China as a victim at all. And I think it's unfortunate that China is foolishly giving excuse to many people to bring in Americans in the picture, because I also want us to be as independent as possible and not to need to bring the Americans or anyone in. So I think that's where, just for people to understand where I'm coming from on the foreign policy question. Yeah.
Well, yeah, let's acknowledge the differences, but at the same time, Richard, the situation right now is that the United States is determined to stay number one. And it has lost out on the economic front, partly because, of its own doing. it encouraged its corporations to go to China, and technology transfer took place. China then became a great industrial power in the process, and the United States deindustrialized. However, the problem is there's one area where the United States continues to maintain an absolute superiority over China, and that is on the military front. And the worrisome thing at this point, if you look at policy statements coming from Washington.
But sorry, Walden, for pushing back again. You're talking about gross power of US, but US is spread thin across multiple theaters. China can only concentrate its power in our region. Like US is bogged down in a way via Ukraine fighting Russia. It could get involved with Iran in the Middle East, but China is just here. So I don't necessarily buy the idea that in our part of the world, it's US having complete dominance. I think China has a lot of its own power to bear if you look at some studies.
We're always talking about relative power situations, but you've got to realize that the Pacific Rim or the island chain is a huge American bastion extending from Korea to Japan to Okinawa to Guam, the Philippines, Australia. And it's been designed that way since the Second World War, the end of the Second World War. And you have this hundreds of bases plus the massive floating base that is the Seventh Fleet. And now the US has assigned 5 of its 11 carrier task forces to the Western Pacific. So let us not underestimate how that is a formidable power that China, and all analysts would acknowledge that China is extremely far behind when it comes to the military. Plus, China does not have the experience of 20 years of constant fighting by the United States in the Middle East. And, experience, makes a difference. And again,
even if US has been losing, I mean, I don't think US has won any single war over the past. I mean, they couldn't hold on to Afghanistan, to Iraq. I mean,
right. But let us not underestimate how experience is very important when it comes to warfare. And the Chinese just don't have, that experience at this point. But my larger point is that when the aim of the foreign policy of a country becomes, we just need to be number one and we're not going to accept becoming number two, it becomes an irrational drive. So there may be calculus in terms of tactics and strategy, but the fundamental drive of not becoming number two, of continuing to be number one, is quite irrational. And when you have that kind of drive that is the centerpiece of your foreign policy, it's very dangerous. And that's why look at what's been coming out recently. Even the so-called, we're going to be guardians of democracy. Yes, that's still there. But almost every statement coming out from the United States now is, we've got to contain China. Why? Because it's a threat to the United States number one status. If you looked at that on July 12th, when Biden was in Washington, the NATO summit was being held in Washington. He came out with the statement that the United States is the only one that can defend democracy because we are, he said, the indispensable country. And he repeated the words of Madeleine Albright, Clinton's foreign Secretary of State. And so basically, this sense that, we have constructed this formidable alliance system, we're at the center of it, and the United States cannot be displaced because we are the indispensable country that serves as the sheriff of the world, then you could see how, the defensiveness had really come into preserving this international order in which the United States has benefited. Now, the thing is that when you look at China, China, in fact, has not been claiming that it wants to be number one. In fact, it has consistently tried to say we do not want to aspire to be number one. And this is,
Well, then China means Middle Kingdom, and I mean, I don't know. I mean, if I think it's inevitable that many in China would feel that they, as the biggest nation, although they have slightly smaller population right now than India, but India is far behind for now, that they would think that they have to be superior to the United States just by the sheer population and economic size. I mean, aren't we underestimating also China's drive to be the hegemonic force, to make the world safe for their own political system? I mean, if China feels that they're doomed into a structural containment kind of Cold War competition with US, isn't it inevitable that China would want its own form of hegemony? And honestly, if you look at some statements by Xi Jinping, especially off the record statements and some of the speeches that are coming out, if you look at them, they don't look very reassuring. It looks like he's saying the only way for us to secure ourselves is to make sure we can take care of ourselves, and taking care of ourselves,
again,
we can beat US in wars.
yeah, but again, this is the dialectic of containment, counter containment, and this sort of thing begins to run out of control.
Spiral.
But at the same time, I think that there have been so many. I don't want to be a defender of China, and I'm not a defender of China.
No, not at all. Not at all. I want to be very clear. Sorry about Walden. If I absolutely
Yeah.
want to do that. I'm just saying, I think what is happening here is that you and I are looking at the same glass, but some part is bigger to me, some part is bigger to you. I think that's really the difference here, and that's why our policy proposal is different.
Yeah, but just take a look at this. Okay. There is, among Western military analysts, there's just this magnification of the Chinese threat. Okay. Look at it offensively, Richard. They have 3 aircraft carriers, which is the main weapon of choice in an offensive way. The design is Soviet aircraft carriers of the 1970s, completely obsolete. Okay. And this is their naval capability. And what do you have with respect to the United States is the state-of-the-art offensive aircraft carriers like the USS Gerald Ford. And now 5 of those are here. Okay, so I just want to mention that first of all, because we need to bring our sense down to reality. Secondly, the United States has hundreds of bases throughout the world, and several, about 200, 300 facilities and bases are located in the rim of the Pacific. China has 1 base, and that is in Djibouti, which is it uses that mainly for anti-piracy activities. Now, the US press has been saying they have a base in Sihanoukville. Well, I went to Sihanoukville last year. There's no Chinese base over there.
But a lot of Chinese gangsters, a lot of Chinese triad gangsters.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, people
lot of
go there.
pogo.
Yeah, a lot of pogos, a lot of people go there to have fun from China, and they go to the casinos. But I couldn't spot a
I'm sure once they won't let you inside the bases where they're building this.
No. But what you talk to people over there, and they would say, "No, there's no base over here. Yes, we have Chinese gangsters, but we don't have Chinese naval infantrymen or Marines running around." So I'm just trying to say that at least when it comes to the military question, there's a lot of exaggeration about where China is at this point. Now, what I'm trying to say is that, of course, we should be on our guard against the superpowers. And we should not be allowing ourselves to be, the subordinate of one superpower or the other. And that's precisely what I've been saying, Richard, is that we really need to steer that fine line where we can pursue an independent foreign policy. And the problem is that our foreign policy has been swinging. It was pro-China under Duterte. Now it's pro-US under Marcos. And we cannot afford these pendulum swings at this point in time. So my sense is let us not put ourselves in the protection of these superpowers, but basically we steer an independent path, and we criticize them when they deserve to be criticized, and not and basically that takes courage to do that. But in the end, that's the kind of independent push that we need, which will get us respected as a country, and which will, in the end, promote our interests. So this is really my sense of. We could talk more at length about this, but let me just tell you, Richard, that the position of the Philippine government at this point in time, which has been now completely put itself in the pocket of the United States. Other countries in the global south are basically saying, why are you doing this at this point? And because they have not had the experience of China as a dominant power. Of course, they've had problems with Chinese projects, but in terms of as a Western kind of power that comes in to dominate your politics and the economy, that is not the experience of most countries in the global south at this point. Their experience is that they have had a lot of Chinese aid. Sometimes that assistance is not something that they would like ideally, but nevertheless, what has happened, let's just put it this way. The rise of China has allowed countries, poor countries in the global south, to have more policy space for development, because now they can access Chinese aid or Chinese credit and not just always have to go to the IMF, cup in hand, begging for money for assisting them to get them out of poverty. And I think just the fact that that policy space has opened up, because now there is an alternative to the United States, to the IMF, to the World Bank, I think is something positive.
Something positive insofar as China is not also engaging in its own questionable debt practices. I think from Pakistan to Sri Lanka to, I don't know, Laos and a number of countries we can see. I won't say debt trap. I have my own concerns with debt trap, but China has been also engaging in its own exploitative economic practices. Not to mention, China has been dominating the mining sector, has been dominating the resource sector in much of Africa, and I don't know how Africa is going to go industrial at some point. But I think that's where the difference comes between us, because you appreciate how China provides some room for maneuver, which I don't disagree with. Where I'm a bit worried is that I'm not sure China provides always a better alternative. I think sometimes even a worse alternative, or that China can weaponize our anti-Western global South sentiment to actually push its own agenda. And therefore, I think where I want this discussion to go on this, and I think this could be more constructive, is, so what is the way forward? How can the Philippines be legitimately and realistically independent? Because, we can talk about Vietnam, but Vietnam has a formidable military. They have half a century of warfare. I don't wish that on the Philippines. I'm not sure the Philippines will have Vietnam-like military capabilities with submarines and advanced fighter jets in the next 5 to 10 years. It takes a lot of time. Their war experience is something I don't want to wish on us. It's a completely differently organized nation, not to mention a communist authoritarian nation. Both of us love Vietnam for many reasons, but I think we have to be... So what I'm trying to understand here, Walden, is how can the Philippines be truly independent given its very limited defensive capabilities, naval capability, air force capability as we speak? Of course, we can fix that, but that's going to take time. And in the meantime, China is already chipping away at and gnawing at our waters, what you named as the West Philippine Sea in your resolution in the Congress in 2011. So I see the ideological argument. I see the vision there, Walden, but I'm worried about what's going to happen next month or even 1 year from now if we want to go fully independent on our own. Because my understanding of independence is that you want us to end our alliance with the US essentially, right? Not only like kick out the EDCA sites and all of that. So I just want to realistically understand how in that gap moment, China is not going to juice it.
Well, as I said, I think that we must really play a smart diplomatic game, which the Vietnamese, by the way, are doing. The Vietnamese are basically, yes, they have a strong military, but ever since for the last 20 years, they've had those four no's. No to siding with one superpower against one another, no to foreign military bases in their country, no to but the four no's diplomacy, which I think has really served them well. Of course, they have their conflicts with China. They have their territorial disputes with China. There are the water hosing incidents around the Paracels. But the point is the Vietnamese do not rely on their military force, but rely mainly, on diplomacy to be able to chart this independent path. I think we should do the same thing. We should also learn how to spend our resources in a way that we're not just waiting for hand-me-downs from the United States in terms
Absolutely.
of
That's where I agree. Let's not have ourselves
of-
for cheap. Yeah, exactly.
Sure, right. And I think you can have a good, smart military policy that's geared to defense without having to massively spend your way into to reach that goal. So, but what you need is a serious government that basically says, okay, we want to be um, pursue an independent foreign policy and a defense policy. What are the resources it will take, both diplomatically, militarily, and economically? That's the sort of thinking really that needs to go into this. And Richard, I have so much faith in our people that if we just had good leadership, we could, become
Absolutely.
basically a good, an effective small country that would be able to carry its punch in regional affairs. But the problem is just this focus on dynastic politics and this dependency on the United States, this hand-me-down uh, kind of thinking. And then, of course, the sort of totally colonial attitude of the Philippine military that basically says there should be no way that we should be separated from the United States. That, I think, is the greatest barrier to becoming a real effective player on the regional and international stage. Some countries have been able to do that, have been able to focus in that way, even though they're small, they have been able to carry a good, sense of where to go. I talk about Singapore. Okay, Singapore is, I mean, in terms of its military, it's nothing compared to any of the other countries around, not even the Philippines. But it carries a punch above its weight because it is able to combine military, defense, and domestic policies in a fairly effective way that makes it a bigger voice when it comes to regional affairs than, say, the Philippines. So that's what I'm saying, that if you had smart policies, you could be just as effective, if not more, than Singapore. The problem is we're a nation adrift because we're a country that has no effective leadership at this point in time. And we get tossed between easy solutions like this time we'll side with China. Next term, we're going to be with the United States. So we cannot afford any more of these pendulum swings. I mean, 150 years is more than enough of this. Okay.
But again, I mean, it's not like Singapore has territorial disputes with China, and Singapore has mandatory military service, I think 2 years for men. They have massive submarines. They have one of the best weapon systems anywhere in the world. I heard friends from Japanese defense forces telling me the Singaporeans can give them a good fight. And not to mention, Americans enjoy permanent position of literal combat ships in Singapore. So are you suggesting that we have to be performatively balancing like Singapore? I think some people say if you look at really Singapore behind the scenes, they're working way more with the Americans than the Chinese, but they can play the game very well. So you're talking about
That's
some
it.
sort of sophisticated diplomacies. So I'm glad this conversation is coming out, because otherwise in another
Sure.
forum, we're just going to name call each other. Oh, you're Amboy, you're China boy. And
Yeah.
I think this is why people have to hear this, because at the end of the
Smart.
day, exactly,
Smart politics and
performative.
smart diplomacy with limited resources, with smart politics and limited
Punch.
diplomacy,
Yeah.
we can have a punch beyond what we are right now. But that's the problem. We don't have the leadership that's able to provide that, because our elites are so concerned about cornering their part of the national wealth that the idea of a strong, independent, resource-based foreign policy is beyond their thinking. So this is I tell you, Richard, I served in the Philippines House of Representatives, and you could count the people there who had a sense of the national interest. It was just really what is in the interest of my family and what is the interest of my dynasty. And the Marcoses and the Dutertes fall into that. That's how they think. The identification of the national interest with the dynastic interest, that's the tragedy of our politics that people like Paul Hutchcroft and others have called attention to us. That we're trapped in this sort of what do they call it now? Patrimonial oligarchic system that continues to reign as the reigning political system in the country. So how do we break about from that? I think that's the serious thing we really need to do, because unless we break away from this elite-dominated and elite-centered politics, we're not going to be able to unlock the spiritual, material resources that our people, that's there. What our people are looking for is leadership that can unlock their energies because they believe, in a cause. And that is the cause of where the Philippines is going. Can you just imagine if, we had a leadership that could unlock that instead of, screwing around, which these dynasties have, unfortunately, have had such a limited national horizon that, they're the biggest, I hate, well, let's put it this way, they're the biggest obstacles to unlocking the energies of our country. And our people have to realize that they have a responsibility to push these people to stop, getting in the way of our national destiny, to put it that way. Okay, we still really have to become a full nation state, and that is the challenge of our times. Aside from, of course, social justice and all of that.
I obviously agree that I think when it comes to strategic culture, I think a century of dependence on America is really corrosive. And I think even Americans themselves, I mean, one of them said damaged culture, if they went as far as accusing us of having a damaged culture. I think it's not in the DNA of the Philippines to be dependent on the US. It was just a historical and geopolitical accident. And now with a more dynamic era, and the Philippines is no longer small, Walden. We have as many people as Mexico, right? We have a $500 billion GDP. We're still a developing country, but we're about to become an upper middle income country. So we're not rich. Sure. We're not going to be a superpower, but I think you have more room for maneuver. And with more resources, definitely should come more imagination and creativity in diplomacy.
But that's one of the problems that we face. And I was head of the Committee on Overseas Workers, during that time. And, Richard, you were the ones who was helping me at that committee. And I think one of the things that really was so that bothered us at that point in time was that people couldn't wait to get out of the country. Okay, like so you had this sense that the destiny of somebody who wanted to make it in life was to get out of the country. And I think that continues to be the prevailing mood among large parts of the younger generation. And I think that we're not going to go anywhere until we're able to overcome that mood that our place is to be outside, and rather to have a sense that, hey, this is a country worth living in, and this is a country that's worth fighting for. And that's, unfortunately, that's not there at this point in time, but that's the kind of culture. So the challenge is all-sided and comprehensive, you know that, okay? And that's what and beyond the material stuff, okay, beyond the demographic stuff, this is really a fight for the soul of our country. And that's essentially what it's all about. And unless we're able to get our people, to really have this sense of we're destined to be something more than just a reproducer of the workforce that goes to different parts of the world, I think that we're
And
not going to.
suffer horrendous conditions. You all then know that, better than any one of us. You had to rescue. You met OFW stranded outside our consulate in Saudi Arabia and many places. Obviously, you got into trouble with a lot of dodgy people because you called them out for their shortcomings. I feel you. I know this is a fact. From my own experience working and covering this throughout the years. I completely agree with you, Walden. You won the top human rights award for doing something special, and that is to talk about economic justice, to talk about importance of having the right trade and industrial policy. So we had some conversation on foreign policy. I think it's pretty clear to people that we have some divergence on tactics and approaches, but in terms of goal, we both want an independent, self-reliant Philippines. But the other thing we want is an economic growth that trickles down. World Bank says that 40 richest family took home 76% of newly created growth. The Razons of this world are juicing it every month or so. They have $500 million or $1 billion being added to their to their net worth, while inflation is eating into the basic necessities of a lot of our kababayan. So I think, as much as I want to talk about the Philippines as a rising middle power, I'm brutally aware of those realities. Where I want to ask you, Walden, is, speaking of US and China, speaking of alternatives, and also as India and others come up, what should be our strategy to make sure we get the most economically out of these great powers and rising powers and our relationship with them? Do you think we should still pursue high quality investments from China? China now is #1 in EV cars. I don't know if you're into EV cars, but I'm looking at BYD and I'm so impressed. I was just in Cebu, I saw BYD. I was just in Amsterdam and I saw NIO. I was just in Auckland and I keep on saying these Chinese brands, EV cars. China has a lot to offer aside from cheap fake stuff, as people know. So do you think we should have a balanced relationship whereby we can also get good investments from China, but also maybe from US? We are still not getting very high quality investments from the US. Where's the semiconductor investment? I'm still waiting for that. Japan may be a little bit better. So what is your stance on the industrial foreign policy, trade foreign policy? I think that's where your unique contribution is really worth commending, Walden. And I think that's where I've been a student of your work on industrial strategy and foreign policy.
Well, again, I think that a number of countries like South Korea and Malaysia and Indonesia and even Thailand, basically, when we, during their period of industrialization, which was in the 1990s and the 2000s, I think they pursued largely a policy that was guided in terms of deepening their industries and making them much more effective. And they did this through different means like tariff protection and other components of industrial policy like local content policy. So my sense is that even as the technocrats of these countries used to talk about free trade, in actuality, they controlled the market. They controlled the trade. They had tariffs that were much higher than the Philippines, even as they said that we're out to eliminate the tariffs as demanded by the IMF and the World Bank. And so because they were quite pragmatic, they were able to build up, um, solid industrial capacity. Okay, not perfect, but for their level of industrialization, it was quite good. And they also had uh, basically rather, you know, um, they had a sense that you couldn't be doctrinaire. You couldn't say it's just the market, it's just free trade. That you had to be able to bring the state or government into an effective trigger for development. And that's what we lacked in the Philippines at that point in time, because we were so dominated by the World Bank and the IMF in the period in the 80s and 1990s. And one other thing that happened is that we made paying the foreign debt that was left by Marcos the priority because the bankers wanted it. And so a lot of the resources and the thinking and the policies that our neighboring ASEAN countries were able to follow, the Philippines was deprived of. And so you now have a situation that industrial, that growth, yes, there's all sorts of economic activity that adds up to GDP growth.
But it's not quality. It's
But
not inclusive.
it's not right. It's not inclusive. It's not quality. It's not headed in a certain direction. So the thing we have to face, Richard, as you know, I've always told you this, and I think you agree, is that we can't afford to have an agriculture that's on its last legs. We need to revive our industries, okay, that used to produce quality stuff, like talk about Angtibay shoes, back in the 70s and the 80s. But all of those were wiped out because we basically fell into this trap of saying that that we could lower the tariffs to whatever low level we had, and not expect that to have a damaging quality in terms of what happens to the little industrial infrastructure that we had. So basically, I think when it comes to the economy, Richard, there are big two challenges. One is, of course, as you already mentioned, it's got to be income redistribution and asset redistribution should take place. That can no longer be postponed. And the second thing is you really need, a good forward-looking strategic industrial policy. And under the current neoliberalism that basically says, just leave it up to the market to determine where you should be going, that's not going to happen at this point in time. So you end up, people don't have jobs in industry, people don't have jobs in agriculture. So the business processing operations, are here today and in India tomorrow. So it's to be expected that if structurally people are being blocked from jobs in solid industrial agricultural sectors, that they would look to moving abroad. and basically saying goodbye, Philippines, but I have better chances elsewhere. So this is sort of the
So Walden, what
the
is the way forward? Because if you look at a lot of studies, and I think both of you also respect this people like Danny Roderick, for instance, One Economics, many recipes, very heterodox, very familiar. I mean, he's a Turkish American economist, very familiar with developing countries, industrial policy. His idea is that we cannot do industrial policy like the 20th century because of changes in supply chain economics. So, but what we can do is that have a kind of a bottom up niche targeted industrial strategy. So you want to focus on semiconductors, go for it. You want to focus on EV cars, go for it. So Indonesia now is focusing, for instance, on iron ore processing, trying to move into battery EV development. Thailand already benefited from the old version of industrial policy, and they're trying to get also on the new ones. And South Korea is already a world leader, so they're already at. So what do you think the Philippines should do given our geopolitics, given our current conditions? How can we have a smart industrial strategy where we can bring in the manufacturing that is important for national development? Because inevitably, Walden, that means banggain mo talaga yung mga oligarchs, di ba? And short of revolution or something violent or something, I don't know, populist Duterte style kind of take out this oligarch, put my own oligarch kind of style. What is the way forward? Do you think having certain corridors of economic development, maybe where I don't know the appointees and those people give I don't know cheaper electricity and water or maybe infrastructures? But I mean, what is a realistic way forward? Should we juice out the Americans and say, hey, for all of the military facilities you're getting, for heaven's sake, put some decent investments? Ask the Japanese to put in more money there. I'm just looking at the short of violent revolution.
Sure. I
What
mean,
can we?
nobody's talking about a violent revolution at this point in
Mhm.
time, but I think we need to look at those areas where we do have, you know, a good base, or we used to have a good base, and I think we should not underestimate our ability to be able to develop a diversified and vibrant agricultural sector. And if you know if you know if what it takes to do that is not just technology but social reform in terms of agrarian reform that basically gives farmers a stake in developing a vibrant agriculture, then I think we should undertake those policies instead of following the WTO's demand that we scrap all our tariffs and basically just let the foreign goods in. And I think we used to have a very vibrant agricultural sector. I grew up in a time when Philippine agriculture was, yes, it was export oriented, but there was also significant parts of agriculture that was domestic oriented. I think we need to be able to recapture that sort of agricultural base. That's why we cannot, it's not just going to be technology, Richard, but you really need also real agrarian land and asset reform. And that's just agriculture. I think when it comes to industry, I think we really need to really look at what are the, what we have many skilled Filipino scientists at this point in time. They're all scattered all over the world. And what if they can come back and, we can maybe focus on developing high value kind of highly sensitive technological industries.
Involved in
So
semiconductors, maybe more
yeah,
high-end fabrication, package design. Yeah.
nandun lahat yan eh. We have all these people that have those skills. And one of the important things about an industrial policy is how do you bring these people to come and we need not just go back and invent the wheel and just start with electronic assembly. We can start at certain high-end industrial processes and then build backward. So, but the policy has to be there, and the ability to push that policies has to be there, and not just to talk
And
about
how
it.
do you navigate the question of the oligarchs who control electricity, infrastructure, all the
Well,
bottlenecks?
this is
Because may oligarch din naman ang Indonesia, may oligarch din naman yung chaebols in Korea. But so what happened that in those countries the oligarchs were tamed, but it looks like in the Philippines it's the state that is tamed. I mean, what explains the divergence, right?
well, this is precisely. I think you hit you hit the nail on the head. It's the sort of different relationship between the state and the oligarchs. In places like South Korea, you definitely had the state playing the leading role, and if this families that headed the Jaybal did not want to go in a certain way, then they were disciplined by the state. So my sense is there's space to be able to build up an effective state at this point that can in fact discipline the oligarchs. So
Well, how do you do that? Because in the case of Korea, we know that was a dictator, Park Chung-hee, who did that. Japan much earlier during authoritarian imperial regime. Thailand, obviously, the junta, in one way or another, has always been in power. Indonesia, a little bit started during the new era. But now, at least we're seeing under more democratic regimes, whether it's in Malaysia, whether it's in Turkey, whether it's, well, not so much Turkey anymore, but whether it's Indonesia, for instance, under Jokowi, there was some sort of industrial strategy. So how can we do that in the Philippines as we have it right now? So it's a very policy-oriented question, Walden, more than theory of the case, I would say.
Sure. Yeah. No, I mean, I definitely would say, and we could start not in big terms like, hey, we discipline you. We start with things like tax policy.
Tax
Okay.
breaks, subsidies.
Add, those where there are not just tax breaks and subsidies. I'm more talking about real taxing power. And we cannot tackle all the problems all the time, but if we can just tackle the taxation issue, okay, in which we have an effective taxing authority that can then generate the resources that can then be funneled to different areas of development, that would be a big achievement by itself. So, but again, becomes a political question. Do you have people in government that are willing to challenge the oligarchs? And it becomes then again a political will, question. But my sense,
Is it only, Walden? Sorry again for pushing back. Is it only again political will? Because my understanding is that first of all, discursively, there's a problem. In a sense that pag tinignan mo yung opposition sa Pilipinas, the dominant opposition, if I can put it that way, although they're not so dominant in the greater scheme of things, it's all about, no corruption and transparency. And we all know that corruption alone doesn't explain really much in terms of long-term economic development. I mean, Korea has been corrupt like heck. China has been corrupt like heck. I mean, we all know that the correlation between corruption and economic growth is far more sophisticated and complex than all of this simplistic rhetoric kung walang corrupt, walang mahirap, and all of that. No offense to them, but I think that liberal discourse, that it all goes down to having a nice, I don't know, person there na hindi lang corrupt and everything will be fine. I think it just completely misses the point. So there's an intellectual gap, there's a discursive gap before even talking about political will and confronting the oligarchy, right?
yeah, of course, I fully agree with you, and I should have mentioned that basically, corruption language or corruption discourse really doesn't get you anywhere because I mean, economic development is, as you said, far more than just people not being corrupt. Okay, you can in fact have a situation whereby there's as you said, in China and in others, there
And
has
now
been significant.
Vietnam, right? I mean, we're seeing lumalabas na yung baho, di ba? Tens of billions in fraud and all. But you and I
Yeah,
have been to Vietnam over the past 10 years. You barely see any poor persons
yeah,
from Da Nang
yeah,
to Hanoi. It's impressive
sure.
what Vietnam has achieved.
Yeah, no, definitely. I mean, that's what I mean. That let's not get caught in the corruption discourse. Yes, we
Moralistic,
need
yeah.
corruption, but more important is really a good sense of direction, a set of policies, and a core of progressive kind of technocrats, if I may use that word, that can lead the way, forward. We can have. I fully agree with you, Richard, that we need to junk the corruption discourse because it's not leading us anywhere. Yes,
I
we
mean,
need
we condemn this corruption, just to be clear, because there are idiots there that are going to twist our words. May mga dilawan dyan, Walden, I caught them twisting my words and I called them out, these idiots. Like, for instance, they twisted my word on inflation. I said, for instance, in Turkey or Argentina, a horrible inflation, but what matters is real wage increase. If your real wages, if your wages beat your inflation, then, you're willing to take some risk. But they twisted it into say, oh, Richard is pro-inflation. So just to be clear to some idiots out there, we're not saying corruption is okay. We're just saying there are more important things than just this moralistic discourse, getting the industrial and trade policy right. Sorry, well, I just have to emphasize this because, we're hitting some vested interests, some
Yeah,
idiotic,
of course. And
simplistic,
I mean, one of the things that I've consistently pushed is that corruption is bad, but it doesn't really explain why we're in the state that we're in. So we've got to go beyond it, and we need to talk about policies. And when you talk about policies, then you come up against structures that need to be changed. And that's where the big challenge is. Madali masyado yung corruption discourse. And everybody uses that, to explain everything. Especially, corruption discourse is what the elite engage in, which is, I'm corrupt, my enemy is corrupt, I'm not corrupt, my enemy is corrupt, and this is why you should
or
elect me.
mass
So,
corruption. Or
mass
mass
corruption,
corruption.
whatever. But yeah, let's condemn corruption, but let's not get bogged down in having it be the all-purpose explanation for everything. Policy is key, and policy means you come up against structures, and the big challenge is how does one come up against oligarchic structures with good, smart policies, that brings down these barriers one by one. Okay, so yun ang sort of pragmatism that we need at this point in time.
Last part of this, sorry, Waldo. Kasalanan mo yan kasi you went into foreign policy. I had to lay out my case. But I think this is a debate that people have to see. Because I think the problem is we're talking past each other and just I'm not talking about you and me, obviously. I'm talking about this foreign policy discourse. And I think we have to go beyond this puerile binary, Team US or Team China. That's pathetic. We have to talk about Team Philippines, right? What is a Philippine first foreign policy, if I can put it that way without sounding Trumpian? But last part, Walden, I think this is really, really important. And to be honest, this is what I was really hoping to discuss more, but I can get back to hopefully down the road, God willing. What is a lesson we can learn from other countries? Because the opposition in the Philippines is not doing very well. If you were to believe some of the surveys, for instance, the Okta survey shows that 30+% of Filipinos are solidly or somehow solidly behind Marcos. Around 16-15% around Duterte. We can debate about that. But I think what was really instructive with those surveys is that it shows that more than 4 out of 10 Filipinos are just switching off. They're just disinterested. They gave up hope, or they're cynical. They just want to migrate. They're sick and tired of usual politics. Only 4 or 5% said they believe in genuine opposition. And I don't know what opposition did with the Pink movement. Those more than 10 million people voted for Lenny. What happened to that? The question I have, Walden, is how to move forward. How to get majority of Filipinos, or at least a huge plurality who have lost interest in politics, interested again in politics. What are the steps forward? Because lahat yan, disinformation, that's essentially elitism and blaming the voters if you're going to say it's all disinformation. I mean, like, whatever, right? Of course, disinformation is a problem. All of us have been victims of disinformation, but it doesn't, I mean, it's just like the corruption discourse, right? Of course, disinformation is bad, but it doesn't explain everything. There's so much more to that. And all of this, dinayaan na lang tayo. It's all the SD cards and all of that. Of course, there's cheating and all of that, but again, it doesn't explain everything. What is the lessons from Brazil, for instance? Lula came back. That was like what, his fifth elections, and he came back after, I mean, he's not a young man anymore. He had to overcome a lot. So why is the left or even liberal left in Latin America so successful? Chile. The guy there is my age. He's like 36, 37. Who's your president of Chile? In Brazil, in Peru. I mean, what's happening there that it's not happening in the Philippines? I mean, Mexico, they have a woman, minority background even in Mexico, who's the new president. Why not in the Philippines? Because aren't we very similar to Latin America? Inequality, feudalism, Spanish background, oligarchy, very similar, right? And yet their opposition is doing far better than us. What's going on?
Well, I think you've had political parties here that have, like in Brazil, the Workers' Party in Brazil, from its origins back in the 70s and 80s, really had a program for change. And it may have faltered in many ways, yes, in the Lula and Dilma administrations, it might not have been that courageous in really confronting the oligarchic structures. Maybe it made use mainly of its budgetary capacities or capabilities in order to eliminate significant poverty, but not really change the structures. And that's what has been the criticism of the PT administrations over here. But they had a sense of what direction change should be in. And I think that is also what you find in places like Chile and other Latin American countries, some other Latin American countries, that basically you need to confront and be serious about structural change. And out of that, need for structural change to come up with certain policies. Now, I'm not trying to idealize what is happening here, but they're certainly ahead of the kind of politics that we had, where in 2022, the leading presidential candidate had no program at all. Well, the two of them, Duterte and Marcos, basically decided that we cannot offer a vision because the only thing that's important is unity, unity, unity. And that still continues to be the case at this point in time. So, however imperfect the attainment of their visions, the progressive parties here, whether in power or in opposition, did have a sense of direction in which to bring the country that you do not have
Electoral success. I mean, that's my point. At least they win elections. They take over power. I mean,
Sure. I mean, and the capacity to be pragmatic, in terms of their participation in the political process. So, I think that that's the big difference, and nowhere was it more evident than in 2022. We had a campaign that was built on nothing but the word unity, and then compare that to electoral contests in Latin America, where people offer real different visions of change. Now, as I said, once they're in power, they may falter, they may derail, they may do this, but nevertheless, it's very important to have a vision that to offer people. So I would say that in the Philippines, this is also what we really need to strive for. And I would say that it would be very important for us to combine a progressive vision with savvy and pragmatism in electoral politics. And that sort of combination has eluded us so far.
I know you're tired and we have a long conversation on this. I want to ask you a little bit about this, Walden. I mean, you know a lot about Latin America. You did your dissertation on Chile in a very important moment. From my understanding, you're versatile in Spanish. You have understanding with the language and culture. I was told by someone within the opposition, I had this conversation about we're very similar to Latin America, but in some ways we're also not similar. And one of the things that was told to me was, Richard, people like you who are very outspoken and passionate and all, maybe you can get away with it in Latin America. Maybe they'll like, the corazon you put into your politics and all. But in the Philippines, people get offended. Medyo snowflake daw tayo. Medyo kailangan mo kausapin ng mabuti. Kasi if you say something strong, baka ma-hurt na sila. And napaisip ako doon, baka because I notice a lot of people are annoyed with me even if I don't mean bad, right? I mean, I'm just an outspoken, passionate person. And I notice in the Philippines, medyo mas sensitive tayo. I mean, at the end of the day, you can say we're more Asian, whatever that means. In a sense that it's not like people in other cultures don't care about face, but to what degree do you buy into that argument that maybe we don't also have this culture of good confrontation, if I can put it that way, of passionate debates, of what I'm saying, and then yet shake hands and hug each other afterwards. That kind of a cariño brutal, no, that you see in other cultures in the left, in España, in Latin America. Parang medyo, you know better than me, but pansin ko yun yung kulang sa liberals in the Philippines. Maraming snowflakes, maraming malaking ego masyado. You just say something na hurt na sila. They cannot withstand passionate politics. And passionate politics is the way to push the envelope, right? You are a very passionate. You're crazier than me. So
No, definitely. Definitely. But I guess making enemies is part of the game. And if you don't have enemies, that means you're not making a difference. So I don't mean to say that the more enemies we have, that means that we're effective. I'm not saying that at all.
Yeah, exactly. Just to be clear.
But I'm just saying that, we need to be very frank about where we are. And if it's confrontative, we deal with that. One of the people that was very interesting is not so much in Latin America, but in Thailand. See, Thaksin,
Absolutely. I wanted to go there.
who was a big reformer, despite the controversies, he went out of the mold of Thai political culture that tended to be very, very sensitive to others and not say anything in formal conversation.
Very Chinese. Their elite is very Chinese.
He was very, I know, he was very curt. He said, we need to do this. You're a bastard, that sort of thing. So he was so out of line with Thai political culture that it was appreciated.
But unlike Duterte, he was effective, just to be clear. Because when you said Mura and all, like everyone said, but we had Duterte. But the big difference, Duterte was a fraud. Thaksin got things going, right? He was effective. He changed things. I'm not a fan, but you know better than me, Walden, right? Thaksin was it. He got things done.
Yeah. Well, yes, I fully
compared to Duterte.
Yeah, he got things done that also created a lot of enemies in the military and that sort of thing. But as I said, to be effective, you have sometimes to risk making enemies. With Duterte, I would say he wasn't just a fraud. He was a real killer, man.
Yeah, but Thaksin had the drug war too, right?
Yeah. I mean, that
was horrible too.
Not in the scale of the Duterte, which I mean, we're talking about 27,000 people. That's horrible, and so I would just want to say that, yes, he was a fraud. He had a foul mouth, but that, it's okay to have a foul mouth if you're serious about your politics. But no, he was a fraud and a mass murderer. So that's really what the difference between him and, say, Hugo Chavez, Thaksin, and some of these other larger than life personalities that were very, very serious about change. And Chavez was one of them. He was a friend, and he really, he delivered. And
He sowed the seeds of disaster, right? I mean, Maduro is
no,
a complete disaster for
yeah, but
Venezuela.
yes, Maduro is, but I think that was not necessarily where Chavez was headed for. He was a real reformer, and so
Did he call you El Profesor or something like that?
oh no,
Chavez?
he said no, he said mi padre.
Ah, oh my
Mi
God.
padre.
Yeah, well,
Yeah,
he had that, like Karl Marx, and like he had that thing, right, with Hugo Chavez and
yeah,
all that. Yeah.
yeah.
But again,
Well,
that's why I don't want to go to Hugo Chavez, because again, they say, oh, we need a strong man and all of that. Because at the end of
no,
the
no,
day,
no.
let's be honest, Hugo Chavez was a military guy. There was an element of
Yeah, yeah.
authoritarianism,
But
to be
at the
honest.
same time, yes, he was a populist, but he was, it was within a democracy that he had, and that's really very different from, say, his successor at this point in time.
Complete dictator. I mean, some would say authoritarian electoral, but you're right. I mean, Maduro is a complete mess, and I think we have to admit that that was a disaster, and they give a bad name to the left. But Walden, I like what you're saying here. I know it's self-serving for both of us because we're very, passionate kind of persons. We piss off a lot of people, maybe unnecessarily sometimes. But I want to. So what you're essentially implying here, Walden, is that because I'm looking at PITA, I'm looking at Future Forward Party, which I move forward, which no longer exists, but they're gonna make another party and they're gonna stick it together. And I remembered when Taksin was studying PITA and said they're so good in TikTok. These guys are great. So parang nanganak yung Taksinismo, right? Ng mga new progressive counterparts, right? I mean, PITA in a way is a youth progressive counter response to Taxinismo, right? I mean, so what you're saying is that you need path breakers. You need people who break the mold, create a new space. And Thailand, former conservative, former, even Chinese, if I could put it in terms of their elite Sino-Thai, very Sino-Thai, Thais, Thaksin, very Sino-Thai. They show us that actually we can make the Philippines a more dynamic political landscape if we know how to push the envelope and get things done. Is that what you're saying, Walden?
Yes, definitely. That would be one of the things that I would say we sometimes the way that things move forward may be in unexpected ways, just like the creation of a Future Forward and Move Forward party. But they're going to be, and I tell you, these are very serious young reformers, and they're
Serious
not going.
people. I always say they're serious people. They mean
They're
business.
serious
They're not
people,
messing
and
around. Hindi sila pa-cute.
hindi talaga. Hindi, they're not going to be, they're going to reform into a new party. And I don't know how long the the Thai establishment can keep on preventing them from coming to power. But I think that it's just a matter of time, because definitely in the next elections, whatever is going to be the successor of the Move Forward party, is probably going to be again the top notcher in the elections. And so I would say that well, you've met some of these people, some of them are my friends, and they're very serious in a way that
People.
elite politicians in the Philippines, or even middle class politicians, are not. So
Yeah. Walang
um,
pa-cute sa kanila. I
really
mean, they're
very
good in social media, pero hindi sila pa-cute. I mean, these
and
people are willing to go all the way. That's the difference, eh. Tama lang you do TikTok, tama lang you do social. Yeah, but you have to mean it. Hindi yung pa-cute lang and then things go a little bit scary. Oh, ayoko na, mag-migrate na ako. I'll go to New Zealand, whatever. It doesn't work that way. Wala tayong tinatamaan. Wala akong sinasabi, Walden. I'm just saying what I'm saying, right? Last point.
baka
Yeah.
magalit yung mga pumunta sa New Zealand sa iyo.
Then I love New Zealand. Kasi, well, I'll tell you a story. So I was in New Zealand, right? Pauwi na ako, and we were talking about Senate. And I said, oh, you think Bato and Robin Hood is the worst? It could get worse next election. And I talk about prospects of, I don't know, Polong and Basta. And sabi na, buti nga nag-migrate tayo. And I said, what? I'm here. I'm going home. Sorry na lang, di ba? But the last thing I want to say here, things are feeling a bit different here. And, we can talk about differences within the left and all of that. But But now there's open conversation about Riza considering going for at least the number two highest office in the next election. That that she no longer has to settle for anything less than vice presidency, if not the presidency. Of course, we can have a long conversation about viability things, but at least there's that air of hope and possibility that I think we never thought, possible maybe, or maybe not as probable as we see it right now. So for all your criticism of Marcos and Duterte fight, I think it at least opens some space for Riza and the rest to breathe and imagine a new possibility. What do you think about this? And what do you think Riza should do? What do you think? Again, I don't want to put you into trouble, but in a constructive way, how should Riza, I mean, she's getting it obviously more right than the liberals, the low ones, but how can she get it even more right and pave the way for some transformative politics come 2028?
Well, I think that Riza definitely, is from a progressive point of view, the dominant figure, political figure at this point in time. Her concerns, her legislative priorities, which she has been able to achieve, and her putting herself on the front line to of national interest I think very, very admirable at this point in time. I would definitely say, in terms of a viable figure that is charismatic and can in fact win the allegiance of people, especially the youth, I think Riza is it. And I feel she brings certain qualities of idealism and pragmatism, that is exactly, I think, what we need at this point in time. So I'm very happy that people are considering her for, higher position. And I'm so happy that I was able to have the chance to work with her, in a couple of years ago. So I think her performance, I mean, if you talk about who really shut down the pogos, okay, it was Risa. Okay, and I think that is
And got
something.
Kiboloy into hiding-ish.
Yeah, sure.
Harry
Sure.
Roque
So
on the watch list now. I mean, like all of this clownish
yeah,
figure.
yeah, and that's a very, and basically what she has done is, stand on her principles. Roque might have tried to use his awful mouth to try to get out of traps in that Senate hearing, but he wasn't able to because he was just seen as a slimy character compared to Risa, who was serious about pursuing the national interest. So So I would say yes. I would definitely think that that Risa does deserve a higher position than the Senate at this point in time. And who knows, things can change in the country
For
so that
better.
the election becomes open to her kind of politics. So she has a very good political instinct, I believe. Um, 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 what is effective uh, at this point. And I believe she does have a good staff that helps her navigate the way in a good way.
Yeah, I mean, she's the first social democrat, progressive slash socialist senator since Isabela de los Reyes, if I can
Yeah.
recall. And then so you guys have been among the few legislators with progressive leanings and fighting it hard. So here we are. I mean, from the hellish years of Duterte, again, no credit to BBM, but at least there's some opening. And that's what perhaps where I'm coming from. But I agree with you. There should be no complacency. We should make sure that we're not played by the superpowers while holding our line and holding the ground. And I'm glad that, people could see we have some differences of opinion at least initially. But I think in terms of the direction for forward, and you keep on affirming my instinct na medyo peronist na you need sometimes to push it and a little bit left and a little bit right and all of that, and the Taksin example was not helpful, but thank you all then for reaffirming some of my sensibilities. That's very helpful. I know there's so much we can discuss, but I know you have a long day ahead of you. Thank you very much, Walden, for that fantastic discussion. And I hope in the coming weeks or months, especially with my updates to ICC, something close to our heart, it looks like things are moving a little bit in the right direction. I was at The Hague not long ago. I heard some things here and there about ICC. So maybe we can discuss things on a more positive note, because you don't seem very optimistic on some of the domestic politics part as of now. Salamat, Walden. Mabuhay ka. Obrigado.
Sure. Okay, Richard, take it easy.
God bless.
And I have to go back to my conference, and I'll see you in 2 weeks' time.
God
And I'll
willing.
have something about what's happening in this part of the world.
Exactly. Inshallah.
Okay.
Thank you very much. Talk to you soon.
Bye. Right.